Hello, FPL managers. We are back with the FPL Optimized podcast. This is episode number 114. I'm Sertalp, your host today, and this is the podcast in which we combine analytics with the good old eye test. Data or grass, or data and grass? That's the question. Unfortunately, we weren't able to record anything recently due to family commitments around Christmas and New Year, but I'm back. Buzz needs one more week. He's on vacation again. And knowing this opportunity, I have two great guests today to talk about the upcoming period in FPL. Joining me today are two brilliant minds from the world of fantasy football analytics. James, known as FF_Trout on Twitter or trout-post.com on Blue Sky, where he is more active. And Jonny, you know him as FPL Spaceman on Twitter, but he is Jonny C on Blue Sky. Well, James is, for people who don't know, is one of the best in FPL analytics, and Jonny is a data guru when it comes to understanding fixtures and their implications on FPL strategies. And before we start, just a kind request to everybody listening on YouTube to give this video a like and or subscribe to the channel. And James, Jonny, welcome to the show. Well, this is not your first time in the pod, but before we dive into our main topics, could you both share a bit about yourself to new listeners and your FPL season so far? Let's start with James.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Sertalp. I'm very happy to be here once again. I am James. I'm a big nerd. That's probably the only thing that you need to know about me. I really enjoy using mathematics and optimization to try and win fantasy football. I think it works well, but also it's just really, really, really fun. This season, I've had mixed results. Right? I mean, I started it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I started really well, then I had a few bad weeks, and then I had something like 10 really good weeks in a row and got up to about 20k in the world. And then since then, I've just dropped off a cliff. And now down at 182k. I'm actually just reading that for the first time. I avoided looking at my rank till this very moment.
Sorry.
And yeah, that's a disgrace. I hope to be back in the green soon enough.
Thank you.
I'm Jonny. I was going to say formerly FPL Spaceman. I guess I still am. People still. I remember I took the profile photo off on my Discord one at one point, and people said, "Where's the astronaut gone?" So it's not getting away from me. I am also a fantasy football nerd. I think that's even my Blue Sky bio. Again, just love analytics and bringing that into FPL. I've had a few good seasons, but this season I've really focused on actually multi-format fantasy. So I've been playing quite a few other games as well. So I'd still find most of my time thinking about FPL, even though it's actually not the one where I can win much prize money. But the pride is at stake there. So I'm pleased to be ahead of James now. I've just recently overtaken him. I had a pretty poor start actually, but then just sort of slowly climbed from there. Played Wildcard 8, have had a few. I feel like I'm getting quite a few injuries, but then I think back to last year, and actually that's kind of just the norm. I think you always feel like right now is when you have more injuries than you've ever had. Although I do have no bench at the moment, so we'll see. But 100k, sitting pretty good. Got all my chips left, apart from obviously the first wild card. And this is my favorite part of the season, is when all these chip strategy stuff comes in, and you can actually make fixture gains here and there rather than trying to, basically just sell your injured player for whoever looks okay. Really excited to get into the second half of the season.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for joining me today and introducing yourselves. So today it will be more like a question and answer, and we are focusing primarily on two key topics that are on a lot of FPL managers' minds. The first one is we will discuss the newly introduced assistant manager chip. It doesn't feel that new anymore, but still we haven't used it. And second, we will explore the potential blanks and doubles for the upcoming game weeks and how these could affect our chip strategy. So let's start with the assistant manager chip discussion, and I will ask Jonny. Could you start by giving us a brief rundown of the assistant manager chip and your first impressions, more importantly?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it must still be quite a new chip because we still don't have any manager prices.
True.
So don't know. And managers are being sacked, and obviously that affects the teams. Although actually, based on the way the rules are, like you pick a team. It's basically how I was reading it when I was trying to pick out the logic of people were asking questions about what if the manager gets a yellow card or gets suspended or leaves the club and joins a new club, and the rules are basically just saying like you just keep the team. So
Mhm.
it's more fun to call it a manager. I agree with the branding, but in my head and in terms of solving, it's pick a team. Points for wins, points for draws, points for scoring, points for clean sheets. I think my first thoughts were that it's a very powerful chip. I don't think we've ever had anything this big. It's 3 game weeks long and just seems to be, based on the projections, more expected value out of this chip than any other chip we've had. I remember even some of the earlier chips were just almost nothing. There was the all-out attack chip where you played 2-5-3, I think. So basically, you can play your 8th attacker instead of your defender, which is worth I don't know, 2 points or something like that. Often gets wrong. Whereas this one is like, okay, this is something I can really structure the season around in terms of where I want to try and play it. But equally, it's the kind of thing where I think because of the way the doubles are lining up, we're not going to be able to play it across 2 doubles. It's going to be a double and 2 singles. So playing it in 25 or 33 or 36 probably isn't going to be a huge amount of difference other than like when the table bonuses come in. But in terms of raw expected value. But the big difference is going to be in terms of trying to increase or decrease your correlation with other people. So if everyone else is picking one team, you can go and pick another team, or even right at the end of the season, you can, if you're doubled up on a defense and you pick their manager for the last game of the season, then instead of getting 4 points for each defender's clean sheet for 8, you can get 10 because it's 2 points for the clean sheet of the manager. So I think that's where it's going to really come into its own in terms of that's the more interesting bit. I think there's not as much interesting in terms of like how much EV can I get out of it. It's going to be a double and 2 singles unless we get something unusual. But very excited to see how it goes and get some manager prices to actually start putting in properly in a solver. But yeah, exciting.
Yeah, correlation is a really good point. Yeah, I didn't really think about it, but yeah, it makes lots of sense. And James, from an optimization perspective, then, what are your early thoughts about the assistant manager chip? Do you think there are any particular challenges or opportunities it presents?
Yeah, my initial thought with the assistant manager chip is, wow, that's a lot of fun. I think that it's I'm glad that FPL decided to do something a bit different with this chip. I think that I personally was expecting them to go with, I don't know, like some version of all out attack or pick your own captain automatically, maybe pick 2 captains, something like that, which would have only really required a very small modification in the way that we think about the game. It would have just been, you know, pick a decent double game week to play it, and it probably won't change your kind of overarching strategy or the outcome this season. But I am really glad that they shook things up. I'm glad that they've picked, they've designed a chip that you can use across multiple game weeks. Um, and I'm glad that it's as powerful as it is because it's forcing us to reconsider what we already knew. I think over the last 3 years, we had some pretty good ideas about how much chips are worth, um, and when the best time to play chips tend to be. And Assistant Manager has just completely kind of tossed all of that by the wayside, and we're playing a very different game now. And I'm all for it. I think it's fun to mix things up. And in terms of optimization, I think it makes the problem more challenging to model because previously in FPL, decisions are kind of independent from one another. You can have a model, kind of a mental model, where you make decisions in game week A, and then you make decisions in game week B, and the decisions that you make in game week A and game week B are different to each other. They're completely independent, and making a decision in game week A doesn't change the decision you make in game week B. But with the assistant managed chip, that's not true. if you play the assistant manager chip in game week A, then you still are playing the assistant manager chip in other game weeks. So it forces you to kind of remodel things slightly and think about the game in a more a more holistic way, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, I can also make this comment that James was really excited when the chip is introduced. Like, I remember him sending messages more often than he usually does. So, uh, thanks for sharing your insight. And let's move on to our second topic. Johnny, you have done some detailed work on the flow of the potential blanks and doubles, and obviously, they will be important for creating the chip strategy. But could you simplify the current scenario for us and highlight the teams and game weeks we should be particularly mindful of?
Yeah, so there was well, I'm going to start off by saying that I'm going to credit Tala Nadim in the Discord chat, as well as Alistair, who's on the pod before, and Ben Krellin, who everyone knows, who obviously come up with a lot more of these ideas, and it's useful to bounce ideas off. Their knowledge of the broadcasters and how that all interacts with other things and all the dates and stuff is stuff that I struggle to compete with. But hopefully I can bring in like market-based analysis on who's likely to qualify, and a lot of the permutations are quite useful to figure out. So what I've put on screen as well is the calendar. So we've got the other half of the season up to game week 30, but also highlighting where the points of information are. So essentially this season, we're going to have slightly smaller double game weeks and black game weeks to last season, because the FA Cup quarterfinals used to interact with a game week, whereas now it's only the League Cup final and it's the FA Cup semi-finals. So game week 29 will have two blank fixtures from whichever teams make the League Cup final and whoever their opponents are. So going into the semis, we had Newcastle against Arsenal and Liverpool against Tottenham. Liverpool were pretty heavy favourites in the markets, and then lost 1-0. So now they're less heavy favourites, but still favourites. Whereas Newcastle were slight underdogs, but then won 2-0 away at the Emirates. So are now fairly heavy favourites. So it looks pretty likely that Newcastle Palace is going to be a blank in 29. And it's a bit up in the air between Villa Liverpool and Fulham Tottenham. But Arsenal Chelsea could still be a blank.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a blank later in the season in game week 34, which is the FA Cup semi-finals. Those are quite fun. So I've got some numbers here on the screen for rough projections, but I think even putting these to two decimal places is maybe too precise for how far away we are, given we're literally recording during the first game of the FA Cup third round. So we've got the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round, the quarterfinals, and to make it into the semi-final.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, the blanks from here are most likely to be the fixtures with the best teams in them. So these are our two blanks. So we probably will get 3 or 4 fixtures moving from here, just because Premier League teams tend to go a bit further. But if Liverpool and Tottenham both make it, obviously that only causes 1 blank, not 2. So from here, it's really hard to say. These are the ones that we're trying to get more and more information on. Whereas the game at 29 blanks, we've got a pretty good idea, because all we need to know is the confirmed result from the second leg of the semi-finals. So
Mm-hmm.
Newcastle Palace, 2-0 lead to Newcastle, now at home, now with Bruno Guimaraes back, and now with Fabian Schär back, who were suspended. So those fixtures are, we've got a good idea. It's down to just one more game. Whereas the FA Cup ones are so hard to find out from here. So those are the two blanks. We've also had Everton Liverpool postponed. And because Liverpool are potentially going to make the League Cup final, and also are quite likely to make it quite far in the FA Cup, and their opponent's Tottenham anyway, if they do have blanks in 29 and 34, then they'll run out of free midweeks, because we've only got 33 and 36 as the free midweeks outside of European ones. So that's why we think that game week 24 or 25 looks pretty likely for where they put that in, to be proactive. There was also a report, I think it was from the Mirror, announcing a potential date on the 24th, which doesn't now fit because of the date of another fixture. So that's why we don't know 24 or 25. The 29 and 34 fixtures I realise this is a bit long. What they normally do and have done in the last few seasons is the first set of blanks goes into the first free midweek, and the second set of blanks goes into the second free midweek. So that would be game week 29 blanks from the League Cup final going into game week 33. So the teams that blank in 29 would double in 33 because that's just where the fixtures move. And the teams that blank in 34 from the FA Cup semi-finals would double in 36. So they're kind of inverses of each other, at least in terms of doubling and blanking sense. Doesn't always happen like that, so that's still an assumption on what the Premier League would do. But it does make more sense here as well, because we see this information point just before game week 30 is when the FA Cup quarterfinals are played. So before that, we'll already know who's blanked in 29 because the League Cup's already been. So we have those fixtures to move, and we can try and put them in 33. Whereas we don't know who's going to blank in 34 for certain until those quarterfinals, which are like the midweek before game week 30. So it would give them only 3.5 weeks notice if they were to put those into 33 midweek. Whereas they could announce the game week 29 blanks into 33 with a bit more notice. They don't always give the notice, so maybe they don't. So essentially, those are the blanks and fixtures. There's a few small edge cases. So after the game week 37 fixture set of fixtures is the same weekend as the FA Cup final, but there's a free midweek in 37 afterwards that they would probably just move it into. So it would be as if it's the same week, it's just it's played on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. But the Europa League final is that midweek. So if Man United or Spurs made it all the way to the Europa League final, that midweek wouldn't be free. Man United will have enough spare midweeks because they're not going to make the League Cup final, and their opponents in 29 aren't. But Spurs, who now are more likely to make it, more than twice as likely compared to before the Liverpool game, if they make the League Cup final, the Europa League final, and either the FA Cup final or the semi-finals and Villa make the final, then they won't have enough spare midweeks for those 3 postponed fixtures. So they might be proactive. The Premier League might be proactive and put that Fulham Tottenham game into 25 if we go back a page. So we think that's a bit unlikely because those midweeks are also when the European Championship, the European playoffs are. So the Champions League playoffs, the Europa League playoffs. So Spurs need to be in the top 8 to have that week free, and they're about 75% in the markets to do that. So they'd need to make the League Cup final and finish top 8, and the Premier League decide to be proactive. So it's plausible. It's probably 5-10%, but fairly unlikely. It would be quite a few things coming together. So there's a really small chance that we do get double game week 24, double game week 25, with Liverpool Everton in 24 and Fulham Tottenham in 25. But it's so negligible that I might as well say it won't happen. But it's not impossible. But 29 blank, 34 blank, 33 double, 36 double is our main strategy. And it's likely that 29 and 33 are the inverse of each other, and 34 and 36 are the inverse of each other. But yeah, we'll have a lot of information. Game week 28 is quite an important week in terms of 27 to 28 because that's when we get the quarterfinal draw. So then we can go, okay, the semi-finalists are this team or that team. And if, for example, Liverpool draw Tottenham in the quarterfinals, then that's the same fixture as in 34. So one of them must make it. And therefore that game's split up. So we'll get a bit more information ahead of 21. Game week 24, 25 double is probably announced ahead of 23 because they need to be sure that the midweeks are free. Ahead of game week 25, we get the next round of the FA Cup, get a bit more info. And ahead of game week 28, we get the round before the deciding round. So those are the sort of information points to watch out for before we can really start. And then ahead of game week 30, we should just know the rest of the season because they won't have announced game week 36, but we know that it's the remaining fixtures. Unless they throw us some curveballs and do something a bit strange, which they have done. So all these assumptions are still assumptions. But the blanks will be definitely blanks based on who makes them. And we've still got weather postponements, just to add in, if there are any more. There was a meeting about the Everton-Peterborough game today, which nearly got called off, but not in the end. So lots moving parts.
But
I
based
hope
on
that helps rather than added more info.
no, it definitely helped. But so based on these, so there won't be any double game week, like 2 double game weeks you can cover with the assistant manager chip, right? So because like doubles are 33 and 36, and possibly 24 and 25. So there's almost no way for you to cover 2 double game weeks with the chip.
Yeah, the only way that would happen is if there's a weather postponement or something. So some of these games are midweeks. I've forgotten if 30 or 31 is a midweek fixture. But some of these, there's a midweek for like European competitions. But hypothetically, if I'm just looking at the fixtures here, I don't know, let's say Leicester Brighton in game week 32, if that one had got, if Leicester and Brighton had both had a game postponed from earlier on that then went into 32, they would both be free. Maybe that's not a good example. No, it'd be a game from earlier. But like 2 non-European teams who have a weather postponement, they might not put it in 33 or 36 if they're also got cup games.
I see. Okay.
So, but again, that's edge case stuff. We're not expecting that.
Okay.
But then we weren't expecting Everton Liverpool postponed. So,
don't
know.
Perfect. So then, and also as you mentioned, before game week 30, we will know the rest of the horizon. Like obviously, if there are no postponements or any unexpected stuff. So then it might be important to kind of like have a fluid plan until game week 30 and then fix those plans after game week 30-ish. Well, obviously, like some of them will depend on the previous chip usage, but
I think so. Wildcard 30 has been highlighted as quite a popular like default strategy to kind of aim at from here. Some people have even suggested Wildcard 31 because if you were dead ending into 29 to buy Haaland, Man City have actually got like an easier fixture. I've forgotten they're playing a 30. So you could keep him for that game. And then wildcard in 31. But you can wildcard with all the info. Who they play? Leicester in game 30. Yes. And then you sell them ahead of Man United, who are much better. So wildcarding there, with the decision being made of, okay, I know whether I'm going to bench boost in 33 or assistant manager or vice versa, seems to work. I guess the disadvantage of wildcard 31 is that you can't assistant manager 32, 33, 34 because you could maybe if Newcastle do it. Moving blanks around. No, that does work, yeah. So 30 is a point where, this kind of happened last season. I think I think even the game week numbers were quite similar. Is actually free hit 29, wildcard 35 was quite popular in the analytics group, but also 30 wildcard free hit 34, which was a double, not a blank. Or was a blank for one team? Can't remember. It was unusual last year because the free midweek came after the week where the blank was. So we had some teams doubling, some teams playing a single, and Spurs blanked. That was it. The Spurs blanked in a double game week. So that was odd. But so the numbers are the same in terms of the game week numbers. So if people were scarred by whatever they chose last year, then you might have to do the same, technically.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. And then, James, considering these fixture scenarios, how do you think should FPL managers adjust their chip strategies, especially when it comes to timing their wildcard? Of course, that's the bigger piece here.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Wow, yeah, I just learned a lot there from Jonny. I mean, that was a great deal of information. I think the first point to make around the timing of the chips is that we don't know. right? All of this, all of what Jonny spoke about is just uncertainty. I mean, that kind of highlights the amount of uncertainty that there is. We don't know how big, how many fixtures are going to be in game week 33 or 34 or 36. We have really no idea. I agree with Jonny that I think that for now, like kind of thinking about wildcarding in game week 30 makes a lot of sense. But I think the more important point here is that since there's so much that we don't know, that we will know in like 9 game weeks' time, the most important thing is to put yourself in a position where you can best take advantage of the information that becomes available. So you're almost kind of playing a meta game. Rather than trying to maximize points, you're trying to maximize the amount of flexibility that you have at times when information becomes available. So if you could go to the previous slide, Sertalp, there, Jonny has very kindly marked on all of the kind of the times at which we expect new information to become available. So the first is before game week 21, then before game week 23, before game week 25, before game week 28, and the real big one is before game week 30, which will decide, I guess, the configuration of the later double game weeks. So from an optimization and decision making perspective, I think the most important thing is to make sure that you have a lot of flexibility around game week 30. I think that's the highlight. And I don't just mean keep the wild card in hand. What I mean is, think about how you might want your team to look if you're wildcarding much later on. I mean, what you probably want is 4 or 5 free transfers in game week 30 so that you can then kind of, I don't know, especially actually, I guess before 28, you want 4 or 5 free transfers so that then you can, I don't know, so that you can just leap on the fixtures that are going to happen in the early 30s before you've even decided when you're wildcarding.
Yeah, number of free transfers is a really good point. Yeah. And
I think
thank you.
the fact that we can have 5 transfers banked as well now is
Yeah.
actually, so another way you can play it is you can free hit in 29 and wildcard in 35. There are other strategies, but I think these ones come up quite well in some of the solves we'll cover in a bit. But I think you can feasibly decide in game week 28 which way you're going to go from there and pivot. Because if you land in game week 28 with 5 free transfers, which is probably going to have some good fortune of actually being able to manage the game week 25 double and not having injuries, but you could then decide based on who we think is going to double in 33 or 36 even, and blank in 34 from the quarterfinals we just had, whether you want to keep the players that are in game week 29 because they're going to double in 33 and then play in 34 but not double in 36, or if you want to sell them to not have them in 29 because you're going to wildcard and free hit them back in 34 because they're not playing in 34 and doubling in 36.
Yeah.
So depending on that correlation between 33, 34 and 36, I think you can actually get to game week 28 if you have a lot of transfers and commit at that point. Obviously, ideally, you'd want to wait till 30 to commit, but we have a blank game week just before it. So you might need to free hit in 29. But I think those are the two kind of macro strategies that make sense here. But just to be aware of is actually, if you can avoid committing in game week 27 with your transfers by either rolling and putting out a player who's not great but is okay, or not taking some greedy EV, then the free transfer value is probably going to change quite a bit. So yeah, double game week 25 is a bit tricky because we get some info there, but then Liverpool might be doubling. So they might be doubling, but then you find out that they're doubling in 36 and not. So it's confusing. But yeah, that 27 to 28 is, I think that's the point where most people are going to start committing to a path. Whereas up to then, it's likely that you can stay flexible without foregoing too much expected value,
I
which is
think,
normally
yeah,
what we do in previous seasons. But it is because you don't want to stay flexible at the cost of lots of points, lots of expected value.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a bit of a trade-off, but I think up to 28 you can probably get by prioritizing flexibility.
yeah. I just want to say that I think that yeah, this talk about flexibility is so much more important this season than last season, because all you could really do about the flexibility of your team last season was just kind of, I guess, pick players at price points, although that I think matters maybe less than other people think it does, and have 2 free transfers at critical moments. Whereas now, rolling now is going to affect how many free transfers I have in like 4 game weeks time. So you really have to think about flexibility with a much more kind of long range lens than you did last season. And I absolutely love the change to 5 free transfers. I think that's such an interesting new dimension that is added to the game.
We will talk about the optimization piece in a second, in a minute. But am I then right in saying that, if I was, if it's too much information for me to handle, like I should at least make sure that I have at least 4 free transfers in before game week 28 and possibly game week 30? Is that, do you think, a good trade-off? Let's say, or three free transfer maybe?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Personally, all of this is too much for me to process, and goodness knows it's too much for my solver to process.
So
So
just feed it into the computer, and that'll do.
yeah. I mean, you should see. I mean, maybe if I left it on churning through these combinations for about 6 days, it might get to within 1% of the answer. But
Perfect.
as it stands, I think that all I can think right now is just, I mean, obviously, own max out on Liverpool assets for the double game week. But other than that,
Sure.
just try to save as many transfers as possible during this upcoming run.
Okay. And then before we switch to optimization, so this is a visualization from RapT FPL. It shows the assistant manager EV, or projected points, just before the game week starts. So before the game week deadline, using betting market data. I just wanted to get your opinion on this because I think when we were talking before we start recording, one thing that we have noticed is that most of the bigger points are around, obviously, double game weeks. And anything you want to add on this, Johnny, James, regarding the
Yeah, I think obviously, I mean, you can see the really large ones is City and Liverpool in the doubles, and Bournemouth had that double against Sheffield United and Luton. So 2 nice, easy home games. So the doubles, I think, are all with a red border. But you can see the ones that get close to that are some of the ones that have the table bonus. So Nottingham Forest in game week 25, or Fulham in game week 27, I think it is. So those are the ones. So that's kind of where we have 2 teams 5 places apart who shouldn't be 5 places apart, to an extent of like, oh, this team is doing much better. You see Palace on the final day. That was a mixture of Villa making top 4 already, John McGinn out partying in the week, and so on, and Palace being on a bit of a heater towards the end. Obviously, they won 5-0. But the next best ones after that are just the easy home fixtures for good teams. So I think those are the tiers essentially. So we're not really going to likely get a Palace Villa scenario. That's a bit of an outlier. Sometimes it happens, but they're pretty rare. Doubles are there, so I would really hesitate from using the system managership not in a double, or not covering one of the doubles. And also, in that really rare scenario where we get back-to-back doubles, I think that's just going to be a system manager chip time. But other than that, I think I think you're foregoing quite a lot of expected value to pick a rogue team that you back to
Yeah.
win over Liverpool at home to Southampton or whoever. I think that would only be on like the final day if you're really doing a Hail Mary. But actually, big team home to small team tends to do better than bad team with table bonus against good team, even though obviously when Palace win 5-0 against Villa, that's loads of points. The risk is just quite high. So I think you'd have to be really desperate for those points, which I think most of us shouldn't be, unless it's the last day and your brother's ahead of you or something like that. Or Sertalp's ahead of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are a couple of things I want to add based on these numbers. I think the first thing that is really striking is just how huge the gaps between some of these numbers are. I mean, you have like Arteta in 34 and 35, 16.3, and then is that I can't quite make it out, 6.6, I think.
Yes, right after
Yeah, I mean,
6.6.
like it's just I can't think of any other situation in FPL where making the change to your team is so critical. Probably the only one that compares is a week before bench boost. If one of your players gets injured, then you absolutely must replace them and probably do it for a hit. But this is definitely in that zone where if you run out of free transfers during your assistant manager chip, or I don't know, one of your players gets injured and you have to use a transfer to take them out, then almost certainly it's worth using a hit to remedy that and to put a better assistant manager in your team. So I think it's again really important to be flexible when you have your assistant manager chip, because transfers are going to be really constrained. You might even want to make a transfer every single game week where you have the assistant manager. Um, there's another kind of interesting thing that struck me looking at these numbers. I'd like to hear what you guys think of this. But there's a very like fundamental difference, I guess, between playing your assistant manager chip in 25 versus playing it in 36. Because what I'm mainly, I mean, there's a few different ways in which that's true. But what I think is really interesting is about the table bonus. If you play it earlier on in the season, I mean, maybe it will stick around for next season and we can really see this to a much more extreme level. But the earlier you play it, the more likely you are to get a team in the Premier League whose position in the table misrepresents how good a team they actually are. And like right now, we kind of have this at the moment. With all due respect to Nottingham Forest fans, Nottingham Forest have been fantastic so far this year. Really, really fantastic Champions League caliber team, but they are probably not the second best team in the league. And in fact, there are some teams five places below them who at home would probably be favourites against Forest. But that's much less likely to be the case in Game Week 38. But on the other hand, in Game Week 38, you have teams that are on the beach. So the Premier League table is a more accurate representation of their overall kind of level, but maybe a less accurate representation of how how hard they're going to try and how well they might actually play in that specific game. So I wonder what you guys think of this. Generally speaking, do you think it's just in terms of the points in each game week, do you think it's better to play assistant manager earlier on in the season or later on in the season, all things being equal?
Do you want to go first, Sertalp? Or
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
go on. No, you go first. That's what I was offering.
No, I mean, James did a great sales pitch, and I usually fall for them. So yes,
Oh, you're
it
in.
kind of makes sense, right? But yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, which one? Early or late?
Early, yeah, early. I mean,
Early.
that's what his.
Yeah. So I think when we looked at the first people who were doing assistant manager projections, and we were looking at like which ones were standing out, then this was a few weeks ago, and yeah, basically any team that was lower down who was underperforming but was playing Nottingham Forest at home were the biggest ones. Bournemouth as well were quite high up. So I think one that sort of had table bonus or had likely table bonus a few weeks ago that now doesn't was Newcastle at home to Bournemouth. But as we see, a few more games in, Bournemouth don't win all their games and Newcastle go on a hot run and suddenly the table bonus is gone. So it might be that we even get to 25 and Forest have dropped down the table, and Spurs at home to Forest is another one that projects quite highly. That's not till game week 33. But basically, if you look at Nottingham Forest's fixtures and see who they might want to play, Arsenal play them in game week 27 as well. That is away. Those are the teams. So yeah, I think it's true that as we as we get towards the end of the season, after game week 1, sometimes Leicester could be top of the league if they happen to thump Southampton on the opening day, and suddenly game week 2 it's crazy. But I think between 24 and 34, the differences aren't huge. It still is a factor in that we see in the last few weeks, for example, Newcastle have come up a little bit, and we probably are expecting Spurs and Man United to move up a little bit, even though those are teams that might well get a table bonus on a Bournemouth or a Forest or a Villa or someone like that. But the other thing that comes in is that when we get postponed fixtures, teams end up on different numbers of games played.
Mm-hmm.
So, Liverpool are lower down in the table. Well, they're not. They're top. Everton are lower down in the table than they might be because they've got an extra game to play. They'll probably lose against Liverpool. But when we have that again in game week 29 with a blank, we might get to a team being 2 games behind another team in the middle of the table. So they might have a table bonus on a lot of teams, and they've probably got the double. And I think the rule is that the table bonus locks in at the deadline, not at the game. So one of the reasons Palace was so good last season is, they were lower down than they should have been, but they also had games in hand, so they were lower down than they should have been from that. So they had table bonus on 2 teams that they might not have done if they'd played those games earlier. So the doubles around 33 might be quite a good one to do because you might get teams on different numbers of games. But it is quite interesting that if there's 3 doubles and we want to play it on 1, 25 has merits in that teams are more likely to be in a false position from a bit of good luck. 33 has the fact that teams are going to be on different numbers of games played so that they can try and catch up. And 36 has the bonus that teams are likely to be on the beach and you can hit 38. So my current thinking is that teams being on different numbers of games played is going to have more of an impact than being on the beach or being in a false position early on. But that's a really hard question. It's hard to say. And it's another one where we don't know until we get closer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can
Interesting.
decide in 24-25 that you think game week 30 to 33 is going to be a good spot to use it. But then you get there and Spurs were the team you were trying to get it on, and suddenly they've lost 2 in the table bonuses. And you go, oh, well, So things are going to materialize in really odd ways. It's going to be very swingy, basically.
I really hope that they keep it around for game week 1
Yeah.
next season, and we can really have fun and maybe play it in. Maybe it will be optimal to play it super early to maximize on the
I think
table
it's
bonus. We'll see. Yeah.
the other point on playing it early late is, I think this is a point that you raised to me, especially with triple captaincy, when I was a lot of people were looking at playing that early, was the way that you can shape your risk profile and actually how much more control you have over that in the last few weeks than you do in the middle of the season, because you know the effective ownership of the group that you're trying to beat, and you'll know how much of a gap you need to make up and how willing you are to do that. So that was one of the things that really wanted me to try and play it later, was if I need a Hail Mary in game week 38, then the assistant managership is the best way to do that, unless I wanted to save my triple captain or something for it.
Yes.
But
Yeah, that's
I get,
spot on.
yeah,
That's
I
spot
get
on.
a double, I get on the beach, and I get Hail Marys.
Yeah, and can you imagine if you got that 5-0 against Crystal Palace v Aston Villa last season? That would have felt so good. I don't know how many points that comes to, but you're getting 5 goals plus the clean sheet, plus the win, plus the table bonus. That would just be absolutely sensational.
And then suddenly you win your mini league.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Johnny. I think that the assistant manager has now overtaken triple captain as the best way to leverage risk against the field. And that is definitely why this season I'll be hoping for an opportunity to play it in game week 36. Having it for that back stretch looks like so much fun.
I think, I feel the same way. But then also, that probably means triple captaining Salah in game week 24 or 25, which is good and is a big gain over some of the guys who played it in a single game week earlier on Haaland. But it's a bit boring for me. I kind of want to do something different with it. So I think that's not a real downside to it. But it'd be nice to be able to triple captain someone different and do the assistant manager late. Whereas I think triple captain 25 is going to be so popular because Salah might not double again. That might be his only double for one.
Very good point. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's just me being perverse and hoping I can triple captain Dominic Calvert-Lewin against Southampton and Leicester or something. That's more fun.
So let's switch to then chip strategy optimization. I mean, we already talked about it a little bit, bits and pieces, but I would like to ask James a question. We can even get a little bit more technical. But so could you walk us through how you are planning to plan your moves to maximize potential gains against the fixture background we all discussed? So, like, how do you optimize the chip usage given everything we have here?
Yeah, good question. So, there's definitely a few ways to tackle this. So, if the problem was less complex, then we'd probably be looking at things in a different way. But as it is, right? I think in general, the best way to deal with uncertainty in FPL is basically to come up with scenarios and perform analysis on these scenarios. So those scenarios in the current kind of horizon might be, Liverpool get a double game week in game week 24, or Liverpool get a double game week in game week 25, or the fixtures fall in such a way that I'll definitely want a wild card in game week 30. Each of these are kind of what we would call scenarios, and with each scenario, you can say, okay, this scenario has this percentage probability, and this scenario has this percentage probability. You don't have to account for every possible scenario, because there's literally hundreds of them, probably thousands, right? But if you have, I don't know, sometimes you can kind of capture a lot of the uncertainty in like 5 to 10 scenarios. You can get a kind of some big picture ideas. So once you've constructed these scenarios, then you can, or at least my method of handling this is to run a solve that takes each scenario into account a little bit. So okay, yeah, there's like 50% chance of, say, Liverpool double game week 24 and 50% chance of a Liverpool double game week 25, just for example. And so those are my two scenarios, and I'm essentially running a solve based on on average, what are the best moves over those two scenarios, given that right now we don't know which scenario it's going to be. So the process that I'm describing is kind of difficult for some people to get their head around, and I found it really difficult to get my head around at first, because I think we're used to making deterministic plans in FPL. We're used to I don't know, planning this move, then planning this move, then planning this move. You're not so often thinking about the kind of branches of information that you're going to have to encounter. But this method of thinking is called stochastic optimization, and I think it's a super powerful tool for dealing with fixture uncertainty like this. So on a technical level, I suppose that's what I do. That's how I try to handle this level of uncertainty.
I think what also lends it to stochastic planning is that we know when we get the information. I know I'm bagging on about these information cliffs that I put on the chart, but they're amazing. They're so good.
They are.
We know when we get the info. So, and actually, to an even lesser extent, any week we play anything, we get a bit of info. The fixture scenarios are big swingy ones because suddenly a game's not on. But from game week 19 to game week 20, I made a move in 19. I got some info, which was this guy got injured, this guy's playing, this guy's on penalties now. and then I make a move in game week 20. So the concept works to a lesser extent throughout the whole horizon. It's just that we know when there are big chunks of info, so we can feed that in and say, like, okay, plan not knowing which way it's going to go until 23, and then in 23 be ready to jump left or right depending on which one it is. So that's the kind of like, that's the way that you can think about it if you're not actually using a solver yourself, you're doing it manually. Because often
That's
you
a
can
really
come
good
up
point.
with some of the ones. I think that was actually, I'm going to credit James, that was basically how he described it to me when he first had it.
Yeah. So I think it's also worth talking for a moment about how, because obviously, most people can't be bothered to write their own kind of stochastic optimization program. But there are great ways that we've kind of chanced upon of dealing with uncertainty inside kind of deterministic plans where you're not accounting for each scenario. My favorite way of doing this is by altering um, our kind of our idea of how much a free transfer is worth at times when you want to be more flexible. So you can say, okay, I really want to be flexible around game week 28. So in game week 25 and 26 and 27, I want to only make a transfer if that transfer is providing like serious value. Um, uh, that in general will cause you to create plans and play in a way that lends itself towards rolling and having loads and loads of free transfers in game week 28, which then you can leverage to your advantage with the information that you have at that point.
I think it puts you in a position to be ready for anything. So, like, some people will beat you by aiming at a random, well, not a random one, a specific scenario and just aiming at it. And then if it turns out it's that one, great, they've won. But if it turns out it's another one, they've messed up. So you're almost guaranteeing yourself to be near the top. You might not be at the top, but you won't be near the bottom because you're ready to go this way if something happens. I know we talked about like hundreds of thousands of potential scenarios. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where we can churn through all of those, or are we going to run out of
That's
resources
a
on
really good
Earth to do
question.
that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic
Because
question.
I
I
think,
mean, obviously, I really hope so. Wouldn't
yeah,
that be cool? But in general, the kind of the size of the problem does start to become an issue when you have to start thinking about making different decisions for your whole team with the kind of full complexity of FPL, because FPL is already a really complex game, right? If you're kind of multiplying that complexity by thousands and thousands and thousands of scenarios, and the decisions between the scenarios kind of impact the decisions that you make before the information is revealed. What you have is a problem that's so complex that it's, with our current technology, definitely not worth trying to solve. However,
well, I mean, the whole game's a big waste of time anyway, isn't it?
oh yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
sure.
exactly.
Apart
Yeah,
from
this
that,
is
yeah.
totally. But I think that there is room for optimization methods which don't guarantee. What I'm saying is it's really complex to find the optimal solution in a problem like this. But I think there is room for maybe simulation based methods, which we haven't really explored yet as a community. Um, which don't necessarily yield a kind of the best solution, but can still guide strategy and encompass all of the information.
Yeah, I really agree on this. I'm a big simulation fan. I was a teaching assistant for a simulation course many years, and like I'm very familiar with all of those techniques and really fascinated by it. I agree with the simulation approach. It's just like when you have hundreds or thousands of scenarios, you can still like simulate, but as you mentioned, they will cluster around like five, six main scenarios anyway. Like some of these smaller scenarios, like their probabilities are really, really low, and like you don't want to take that risk. Like suppose, like in this case, like maybe you're thinking maybe Fulham, uh, Tottenham game will be in game week 25. You mentioned that its chance is really low, right? So you don't really want to bet on it. If you do, and that doesn't turn out to be correct, yeah, you are certainly losing some projected points. But yeah, this is really good. I think on top of what you said regarding the optimizing this without stochastic optimization, I think one thing I recommend often to people if they don't have the means of running a stochastic optimization solver is to pick one of the scenarios. Suppose you have two scenarios and run, let's say, 10 iterations with both of them, and then see if there are any moves that seems to be common. Like maybe the third best move in scenario 1 is the fifth best move in scenario 2, and then that's the only common move. That's probably a good idea to consider that one highly if, let's say, scenarios are 50-50.
That's a really good point. Yeah. One other thing, kind of related to what you just said, that I think is really important for practitioners of optimization, is it is always, whether or not you're considering multiple scenarios, I think it's always best to think in terms of scenarios. In my opinion, if you've got a game week where a team has a 50% chance of a single game week and a 50% chance of a double, your solutions will make much more sense if you set that to 100% chance of a double or 0% chance of the double, because we're never going to get in a position where they will have half a double. Like it's just not going to happen. And what you're going to be trying to do is generate a plan based on a set of information that contains half a double, and it just won't make sense, and in my opinion won't be strategically useful.
Yeah,
Some
Schrodinger's
with
double.
games have been called off halfway through, but they do they do normally
We've had those
remove
points removed.
they do remove the points normally. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't go, yeah, you can have 45 minutes worth of points. But yeah, I think that's a good point. I think also these heuristics that we're kind of talking about for optimization solvers are even ones you can take if you don't have a solver or you're not using a solver. Like if you come up with a plan the way that you would have had a plan for this double game week, and then come up with a plan for what you would do if it was this double game week, and you see that there's an overlap for a couple of weeks, then you know, okay, that's great, I can just follow that one. Whereas if you go, oh, these paths are really different, then it might be useful to try and come up with a path that makes sense for both of them, and compare that to your preferred path for this one and for this one, and see whether you're actually making a huge difference or if there's a move that you can do that isn't steering you one way or the other. So it's stuff that you can still think about even without actually using a solver. It still sort of holds true. The way we use the solvers is just finding good methods. It's not like it's inventing new stuff that other people can't reach. You could feasibly come up with the optimal solution manually. You probably can't prove that it's optimal manually, but
it would take a while.
Maybe,
You could.
We don't have time for that.
Millions of pages of simplex. Yeah. Sorry.
So regarding optimizing the chip strategy, so there are people on Discord server who are trying to optimize the chips, and I asked one of them, A_bar, to maybe run some chip scenarios, and this is what he sent me. So just want to get your opinion on these solves and if they are viable strategies or not, and ties up with what we have discussed so far. But these are sorted from top score to the worst. The first one is triple captain in 25, free hit 29. Well, obviously it's assuming the double falls in the 25. Free hit 29, assistant manager 31 to 33, wildcard in 35, and bench boost 36. And the second plan is similar in terms of wildcard and bench boost is the same. Only difference is triple captain goes to 33, and then free hit is again in 29, and then assistant manager is from 25 to 27. So I want to get your opinion on these two strategies.
Yeah, I mean those top three strategies are all free hit 29, wildcard 35, are then triple captain, bench boost, and assistant manager in some order in the doubles, which is kind of what we thought might make sense. And then obviously you can see a little bit further down, we've got very similar ones with the wildcard 30 and the free hit 34, and then with the other one. So I think those are the paths that are likely going to emerge as good paths. And you can see that actually the scores are all pretty close. but I did ask James what he thought the best one was going to be before we showed him this, and he did pick the top one out. So yeah, I'm locked
Maybe
in.
you don't need a solver.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Yeah. Well, with all this uncertainty,
No,
I'm just gonna go for the top one. Yeah, I'll go for the top one.
It. That's it.
Yeah, I would say there's kind of an interesting kind of different forces going in different directions here. Like in FPL, generally speaking, it's super valuable, and especially in previous seasons, I would say it's super valuable to wild card immediately before you bench boost, because it means that you can almost, not 100%, but almost guarantee that you've got 15 fit starting players for the bench boost and you don't need to take any hits. But now this year, with how exciting and viable it might be to play the assistant manager chip in game week 36, that's maybe less of a possibility to play it immediately before, because obviously I think if you said, okay, I definitely want to play my wildcard immediately before the bench boost, clearly the best time to do that is wildcard 35, bench boost 36. But that also leads to a less optimal assistant manager chip usage, which, yeah, it's kind of interesting going both ways on that. I mean, this season, I think you could make an argument that it's less important to wildcard immediately before your bench boost than in previous seasons, because our teams are more flexible. We can allow ourselves to be more flexible, so we can, just by playing well and not making many transfers, almost guarantee, in a similar way to the wildcard before, that we don't have any injured players or duds when we bench boost. So yeah, for me, I really like the look of that third one, but the first one also makes a lot of logical sense.
And how about you, Johnny? So, like, I guess you really don't want to use your triple captain in 25 and then leave it for later?
It's boring, isn't it? Salah, double game week, middle of the season, yada yada. Yeah, I mean, I will. Like, I'm not going to forego lots of EV just for the sake of it, as much as I pretend I might. But yeah, I think like it would be nice to triple captain. Well, it depends if we get the double. I might get Isak in 33. It might be a nice double. But because you might want to triple up on Liverpool for 25, and then you don't want to use your assistant manager. I mean, I think these are all quite up in the air. I think the thing that I think here is that there's lots of viable routes, and that's what I kind of prefer. I think if we all kind of get shoehorned into the same one,
Yeah.
because even though the free hit and the wild card are kind of in similar spots in a lot of these, you're going to have pretty different teams throughout that strategy, because when you're playing the assistant manager, you can't triple up on that team, so you only got the double plus the manager. If you're bench boosting in 25 and one of you's bench boosting 36, your structure on wildcard 35 is going to be really different. So I think hopefully this should lead to a lot more divergence and allow people to kind of really pick the players that they want to, or you could even pick the chip strategy that allows you to maximize the players that you want to have.
Yeah.
So if I, for example, wanted to play a strategy that allowed me to have more Newcastle players for most of the season, then I might do that because it's actually quite similar. But yeah, the triple captain is the one that requires the least planning around, because it's just the captain that you had is really good anyway. So I think that's why triple captain 24, 25 is probably going to make a lot of sense, because it allows you to not have to plan until 28. So then you can go to 28 or 30 and go, okay, I know where I'm going to aim the assistant manager and the bench boost. Whereas if you play one of those in 25 or 24, then you might get to 28 and realize that there's a really good strategy that's dominant over all the other ones that involved one of those two in a certain path, but you used it earlier. And I know we have some people who've used triple captain already. We've got people who've used free hit already. I can't remember if anyone did do bench boost one, but Planet FPL, James did bench boost one. I quite like my bench boost one. He had 4 Spurs players, which looked like a fun way to do it as well. If you're going to do it by cheating. So that affects it quite a lot, because also they're going to be wildcarding they've only got one. So the free hitters have got one wild card to change their team, but 29 to 33 might be inverse blank and double, and 34 to 36 so it might be inverse blank and double. So there's quite a few spots where you might want to change your team quite a lot. So free transfers are going to be really valuable to them because they don't have the free hit to use.
So
But then equally, they could assistant manager early and not need to worry about triple captaining some dud in 36 like I want to.
Yeah, this is a pretty good discussion for me. But I have a question for you guys then. Like, suppose we have this sense that everyone is going to use their assistant manager in, let's say, game week 36, like everyone and their cats. So would you then be less incentivized to use your assistant manager then? Like, do you guys think like you are actively trying to be different? Like, if you feel like, well, majority of the FPL base will use
Yeah.
their chip in this strategy.
Yeah, I'm always actively trying to be different in life and in FPL. I think, yeah. I absolutely love kind of taking niche strategies that most people turn away from because they're weird or just because they haven't they haven't realized that it's viable. Like a few seasons ago, I did this completely different, chip strategy to most people. I mean, I think maybe 20% of people did the same thing, and it was just the most fun I've ever had in FPL. Like being on a completely different path to having such a different team to other people is just such a great thrill, and that's kind of why I play the game. So definitely, yeah, if there's an opportunity to use a viable but different chip strategy to everyone else, I will be doing that.
You just get some like nice unique problems as well. Like it's nice to discuss problems with other people who have the similar ones, but actually having a really unique one and having to really think about it in your own way and not having that external influence of what everyone else is saying because they don't have this player or they don't have that one is actually that's what I quite enjoy about being different as well. But I think it depends on your goals. I think my goals this season are a bit different to my goals last season. I'm also quite highly ranked still, but I think I was a bit higher last season. We were all a bit higher last season. But like if it gets towards the end and I'm in a good spot and I'm happy where I want to be, then I'll happily play the same assistant manager. I can easily even play the chip but play on a different manager. So I could pick a different doubler. So actually you can play the chip in the same week but still play it really differently. And because there's so much expected value in the manager, then if there are viable managers, and especially like who you pick on the final day, might be lots of viable options. You can play the same chip strategy differently still. Playing a different chip strategy tends to lead you to different paths by its nature, but you can play a common chip strategy. Making a tongue twister there. You can play it differently still if you want to, or you can not. So I think that's why System Manager late I quite like because I can choose whether I want to really push on or whether I'm happy where I am.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that's good points. And before we wrap up, like any final thoughts from either of you on what managers should be focusing on this coming game week or game weeks?
In terms of like cup results and stuff, or like stuff that's going on in there.
Yeah, I
In
mean
their
that
team?
included, but like
I mean,
if you want to
yeah,
give a generic advice to all of the audience,
roll
roll as
all your
much as
transfers.
possible. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good
I think
suggestion.
basically. I mean, I'm a bit stuck. I've got 3 injuries, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I think just like trust that free transfers will be really valuable later, and actually you're okay to forego a bit now. That's not to say you can't use a transfer now. Like there might be stuff that you want to do, and that's fine. But if you're wary about it, I think this is generally good advice anyway in terms of managing transfers. If you're kind of half and half between this transfer and doing anything, not doing anything is usually the winner
Better.
because stuff changes later. I think it's a mantra I use quite a lot in the Telegraph fantasy game because that one there's no like upper limit on how many you just have 40 for the whole season.
Mhm.
So if I don't use it now, I can use it at any point. I'm not limited on only having 5 at a time. So that really holds of like, okay, maybe I do it, maybe I don't. Basically just wait. So I think that's just patience for a few weeks until we start getting stuff, because it's going to be chaotic coming up. So
I think that's fantastic advice. I mean, that's, I think the most important thing right now is free transfer. Having loads of free transfers in a half a dozen game weeks time is going to matter a lot more than it does now. So save them up. I mean, have you ever? I mean, I don't. I've never had a situation where I've thought, "Oh, thank goodness I used a transfer 4 game weeks ago, because now my value of a free transfer is 0.2 higher than I thought it would be." Like it just doesn't work like that. I totally agree with what Johnny
I
says.
guess
It's
like
better to err on the side of
sometimes there's a
flexibility.
player that you kind of want and you think that he's being undervalued and he could go on a big run at any point, and you decide not to do it, and then you see someone else who's bought him and he goes off and he gets a big haul. I think that there's regret there, like,
Yeah,
but
but I
it's a
think
lot
that's more in the
rarer.
category of
Yeah,
regretting not owning a player than regretting the strategy of when you decide to make
yeah,
transfers.
that's
I think
true.
it hurts more, right?
Mm.
When you make a
Yeah,
strategic bad decision. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. My only other piece of advice is don't sell Trent Alexander-Arnold.
are people selling him?
I've seen people selling him.
I think
Ooh,
so.
Hopefully, none of our listeners.
okay, it's
Let
too
me
late. Buy
check.
him back. Take a hit.
Yep.
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 He's sold by 106,000 people.
Ah,
Wow.
is that everyone who's ahead of me? I'm 107,000. I'm going to catch him up now. I missed his 15 points and then bought him for his 0, so I'm not doing great with Trent, but never mind. He'll reward me eventually.
By the dip. Yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
And thank you guys, and I will just cover our usual content very quickly, starting with the fixture ticker. So Liverpool is the top team for the next 6 game weeks. They have 3 good fixtures in this horizon. Game week 23 and then game week 24 and 25, because of the double possibility, their EVs are a little bit exaggerated, I should say. They are higher than usual. So Arsenal comes second. They have pretty good fixtures in general. I mean, they have Tottenham, Aston Villa, Wolves in the next 3 games. And also at the end of this horizon, they have Leicester and West Ham. So all of them are marked defensively good fixtures, like compared to every other team. And then in the third place, we have Chelsea. So it's kind of strange not to see Manchester City in the top 3, actually. But we have Chelsea in the third place. And their favorable fixture in this horizon is Wolves in game week 22. It's marked a favorable fixture both defensively and offensively. And then we have Newcastle in the fourth place. They're playing against Wolves this game week. Offensively, a good fixture. And then we have City in the fifth place. Then comes Manchester United, Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, Tottenham, and Fulham. So these are the top 10 teams by the projected point average. And in terms
So
of
Everton don't make it despite the double. That's
yes,
how.
they don't.
Don't want to buy it. I feel like I need to buy some Everton players, but they're not great for a little while.
Oh yeah, I can
New
check
manager
for you.
bounce, of course, though.
Oh yeah, that's a
Are you
good
going to tell
one.
me that they are 11th? Are they? They do play Leicester
That's
in
what
game week
I'm wondering
24.
actually. Well,
They're 16th, aren't they, Everton?
Oh, I meant in this projected
oh
points.
no,
Sorry.
they are not. They're not
Not the
11.
table. What are you on about?
They are 13th.
Okay. Villa, Tottenham, Brighton. Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
boring. Yeah, no,
So
the EV projection table, James. Everyone's favorite table.
yeah. And in terms of players, I will start with top naming top 5 players in every position. In terms of goalkeeper projections, Alisson is the top with 25.2 projected points over 6 game weeks. But again, we have an upcoming double either in 24 or 25. That's kind of increasing those numbers. Well, he will play in either of those game weeks and the EV won't change, so the total will remain the same, I guess. And we have Raya in the second place, Pickford in the third one, Onana and Sanchez. These are the top 5 goalkeepers. And then in terms of defenders, we have Alexander-Arnold at the top. So James, we're not suggesting to sell. So his EV or projected points is 29.1 over the next 6 game weeks. And then we have Gabriel in the second place, Virgil in the third place. Well, again, double is affecting these. And then we have Saliba, fourth place, and Robertson in the fifth place. And then we have Munoz at the sixth place. I just want to mention because he's quite cheap, and then his projected points are pretty nice, I should say. And then among midfielders, we have Salah obviously at the top with 50 projected points over the next 6 game weeks. And we have Palmer in the second place, Bruno Fernandes third, Mboma fourth, and Odegaard in the fifth place. By the way, if you have any comments, just feel free to.
Those poor City mids. They used to be premiums, and now they're Foden's just above Semenyo. No offense to Semenyo, but that's
below
player of the season last year, and nope. Not much else to add. I need some cheap forwards, please. I need some cheap
forwards,
guys.
yeah.
Mine
and the
are all
top
injured.
Forwards, Haaland is obviously number 1. I say not obviously, but he's only 0.2 more points predicted than Isaac. Like he's 36.4, and then Isaac is 36.2. And then we have Solanke in the third place, and Wood fourth place, Jackson fifth. But like if you're I guess, can you classify Wood as a cheap forward? Maybe
he's risen in price quite a lot. I can't afford him, so he's not cheap enough. But he's good. He's annoyingly good.
Is an option, I guess. But Raul is Joe Pedro and Raul. I think those are the two. They're towards the bottom. But
I feel like buying Wissa after they beat Southampton 5-0, but before they play City and Liverpool is an odd time to buy him. But
that's true.
Maybe that means less people will have him, and that can be weird and different. Don't know.
I think if you order these players by like total projected points per price, just if you divide the total projection to the price, Raul is the number 1 player. 4.3. He's the best at that. But you sold him, right? So.
I just sold. Well, I'll buy him back. Stop it.
I regret my decision to sell you. Please come back.
I regret making a transfer. I should have rolled it. Didn't listen to my own advice.
And then finally, captaincy.
It's quite interesting this week, isn't it?
It's interesting. I mean, in the ensemble
model,
about
it yet. Yeah.
Ensemble model, we have Palmer as the best option with 7.4 projected points, and Palmer is also the top option in 4 out of 5 models: Fix, Hub, Scout, and Mikel Toglan. Only model that doesn't have Palmer as the top option is FPL Review's premium model, where Bruno Fernandes is the top option, I think, based on this morning. And then Salah is second in the ensemble with 6.7. And then comes Isaac, again 6.7 as a third best option. Haaland fourth, Bruno Fernandes 5, Gordon 6, and Odegaard is the 7th best player in terms of average out of all these models. But what are you guys thinking for captaincy then? Palmer.
Yeah, Palmer or Isak probably. I think a lot of people will go Salah. So I think even though he's a little bit down in the projections, I probably won't go there as well because 1, popular, 2, not projected quite as highly. But Palmer and Isak, I can't really decide between. I think if I had Bruno, I probably would captain him. But I don't have him, and I don't have a nice route to him. So I probably won't do that. But I haven't really decided. Might just go Isak because Newcastle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Johnny, especially with the way that my ranks sadly slipped in the last few weeks. So I'm in a mood to take more risks.
Oh,
And
I shouldn't have given it away. Yeah.
yeah. Take a few more risks. Maybe take a I don't know, play for some fun. I think that this week, yeah, definitely. I think not captaining Salah is the fun play. Definitely the fun play if you own him is to captain Bruno Fernandes at home against Southampton. But sadly I don't. So that's not going to be happening for me. I think it will be Palmer.
We'll
Okay.
see. Sertalp?
Probably Palmer, I guess. I mean, I don't think I will. Yeah, I don't know. I think I will. I will probably. Yeah, Captain Palmer. It is. I feel like that's the logical choice here, but because like
It's
my
normally the last. It's normally the last thing I think about. Really, I don't.
Yeah, it's just like
because it doesn't affect much of your transfer planning through the week.
Exactly.
I need to be thinking about what moves I'm going to make. Whereas, like, as long as I have enough time on the morning or the evening of the day to think about the captaincy, that's fine. I don't need to pick now. I mean, like, Palmer might get injured against Morecambe or something, and then what was I thinking about? But
yeah.
I don't know.
I think I was
Maybe I'm
getting
rushing
Bruno
it at the last minute.
Fernandes. Yeah, Bruno Fernandes is a transfer option. So I
Oh,
suspect
go
maybe
on.
the reason was maybe the model wanted to captain him because of the EV difference. But yeah, I need to check in detail.
Do you want to captain him though?
Well, I can captain him. I don't mind.
Yeah,
Might be a really good differential though, right?
yeah. You might fall further in rank. Perfect.
Well, that's also true. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for joining me today and for the great discussion. I enjoyed it, and this is a photo from
Ah,
Buzz, and this is what
Lovely.
he is doing instead of podding with us today. Um, and that was it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. You can subscribe to our podcast so you will get notified when the next episode is out. You can also follow us on Twitter. For me, it is at Sertalp Bilal on Twitter, and it is sertalpbilal.com on Blue Sky. For Buzz, it is at BattleFieldBB. And you can also find James and Jonny on Blue Sky on their accounts trout-post.com and Johnny C, respectively. And we also have a separate account for the pod on Twitter, which is at FPL Optimized. And until next time, stay curious and stay analytical. Goodbye.